Most people believe budgeting is the foundation of financial success. If you want control over money, you're told to track every dollar. If you want stability, you're told to create a detailed plan. If you want wealth, you're told to follow the budget strictly. And when budgeting fails, as it does for most people, the conclusion is almost always the same. I'm bad with money. I lack discipline. I just need more willpower. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Budgeting doesn't fail because people are lazy. It doesn't fail because they're irresponsible. It fails because it fights human psychology. And human psychology almost always wins. Let's start with the core problem. Budgeting assumes that people are rational, consistent decision makers. They aren't. Humans are emotional, context-driven, stress-sensitive, and heavily influenced by short-term feelings. A budget asks you to make decisions in advance for a future version of yourself who will be tired, stressed, tempted, distracted, or emotionally overwhelmed. That future version of you does not think the same way you do while making the budget. This creates a psychological disconnect. The planner version of you is calm and optimistic. The spender version of you is emotional and reactive. And budgeting forces those two versions to fight. The emotional version usually wins. Now let's talk about cognitive load. Budgeting requires constant attention, tracking spending, categorizing expenses, monitoring limits, making adjustments. Every one of these actions consumes mental energy, and mental energy is limited. When mental energy is depleted, self-control weakens. This is called decision fatigue. The more decisions you make during the day, the worse your financial decisions become at night. By the time most people interact with money, they are already exhausted. A budget does not account for this. It assumes consistent discipline across fluctuating emotional states. That assumption is wrong. Now let's talk about restriction psychology. Budgets are often experienced as constraints. They create rules, limits, no zones, and the brain does not respond well to restriction. Restriction creates psychological reactance. Reactance is the urge to do the opposite of what feels imposed. When people feel controlled, even by themselves, they experience resistance. This is why diets fail. This is why strict schedules fail. And this is why rigid budgets fail. The more restrictive the budget feels, the stronger the urge to break it. Not because the person is weak, but because the brain is pushing back. Now, let's talk about emotional timing. Budgets are usually created in moments of clarity, after a stressful month, after a financial mistake, after feeling behind. These moments create motivation. But motivation is temporary. Budgets fail when they rely on a motivational state that cannot be sustained. Once motivation fades, the system collapses. And when the system collapses, people don't blame the system, they blame themselves. Now let's talk about guilt. Budgeting creates moral categories around spending. Good spending, bad spending, allowed, not allowed, not allowed. When people overspend, guilt appears. Guilt feels painful, and pain triggers avoidance. Instead of correcting behavior, many people stop looking at the budget entirely, not because they don't care, but because shame is emotionally overwhelming. Avoidance feels safer than confrontation, and avoidance destroys consistency. Now let's talk about precision. Most budgets try to be precise, exact dollar limits, detailed categories, tight margins. Precision increases fragility. One unexpected expense can break the entire system, and when the system breaks, people feel like they've failed completely. This all-or-nothing thinking is psychologically dangerous. A system that collapses under small disruptions is not sustainable. Now let's talk about time. Budgets operate on short time frames, weekly, monthly, but financial progress happens over years. Short-term tracking amplifies emotional noise. A bad week feels like failure. A good week feels like success. This emotional volatility makes it harder to stay consistent long-term. Now, let's talk about identity conflict. Budgets often clash with self-image. People don't want to see themselves as restricted, struggling, or deprived. If a budget makes someone feel poor, even temporarily, the brain resists it. Identity always overrides logic. Now let's talk about what actually works. Successful people don't rely on budgets. They rely on structure. They remove decisions instead of managing them. They automate savings, automate investments, automate bills. They reduce the amount of money available for impulsive spending, not through restriction, through design. This is the key shift. Budgets ask you to behave differently. Systems change behavior automatically. When money is moved before you see it, there's nothing to fight. When savings happen first, spending adjusts naturally. When systems are predictable, emotions settle. Now let's talk about friction. Budgets require effort every day. Systems require effort once. Effort once is sustainable. Effort daily is not. Now let's talk about emotional safety. Good financial systems reduce anxiety. Budgets often increase it. People feel watched, judged, behind. Systems feel neutral. They work quietly in the background. Now let's talk about long-term consistency. Consistency is not created by discipline. It is created by removing the need for discipline. When people stop trying to control every dollar and instead control the flow, progress becomes easier. Now, let's address the biggest misunderstanding. Budgeting is not useless. It's useful as awareness. Tracking once, learning patterns, identifying leaks. But it is not a long-term operating system. Awareness should lead to design, not lifelong monitoring. Now let's talk about freedom. The goal of money is not constant control, it is stability, flexibility, peace of mind. A system that requires constant attention undermines that goal. Now let's talk about why budgeting survives despite failing so many people. Because it feels responsible, it feels logical, it feels mature. But feeling responsible and being effective are not the same thing. The best financial systems feel almost invisible. They don't demand attention. They don't create guilt. They don't rely on motivation. They just work. Now here's the reframe. If budgeting keeps failing you, it's not because you're broken. It's because the tool doesn't match how your brain works. Humans are not spreadsheets. We are emotional, adaptive, distracted, and inconsistent. And systems that accept this reality outperform systems that deny it. So the real question isn't, how do I stick to a budget? It's, how do I design my life so I don't need one? And once you ask that question, everything about money becomes simpler, calmer, more predictable, and far more sustainable. Because the best financial systems don't ask you to be perfect. They assume you won't be, and they're built to succeed anyway. There's another reason budgeting fails that most people never consider. Budgets force people to constantly negotiate with themselves. Every purchase becomes an internal debate. Can I afford this? Is this worth it? Should I wait? That might sound responsible, but psychologically, constant negotiation is exhausting. Each negotiation drains self-control. Each decision creates friction. Each moment of hesitation adds stress. And stress doesn't lead to better money decisions. Stress leads to relief seeking, which often looks like impulse spending. So the very tool meant to prevent overspending quietly increases the desire to escape. Now let's talk about the emotional paradox of control. Budgets are supposed to create control, but the more tightly people try to control spending, the more fragile that control becomes. This is because control without flexibility creates pressure. Pressure builds. Pressure demands release, and release usually comes in the form of breaking the budget entirely. This is why people don't slightly exceed budgets. They blow past them. Once the line is crossed, the brain shifts into what's the point mode. This is called the violation effect. One small failure triggers abandonment of the entire system. Now let's talk about unpredictability. Life is unpredictable. Expenses appear without warning. Emotions fluctuate. Energy levels change. Opportunities arise unexpectedly. Budgets assume predictability in an unpredictable world. And every time reality deviates from the plan, people feel like they failed. But the failure wasn't personal. The system was too rigid. Rigid systems break under pressure. Flexible systems adapt. Now let's talk about reward psychology. Budgets delay gratification. They ask people to sacrifice now for benefits later. That can work temporarily, but the brain needs reinforcement. When sacrifices feel endless and rewards feel distant, motivation collapses. This is why people can follow a budget for a few weeks or a few months and then slowly drift away. The emotional cost outweighs the perceived benefit. Now let's talk about financial identity again, because this matters more than numbers. Budgets often frame people as trying to fix a problem. They reinforce an identity of lack. I need a budget because I'm bad with money. I need to control myself. I can't trust my instincts. That identity quietly erodes confidence, and low financial confidence leads to hesitation, avoidance, and second-guessing. Strong systems build identity differently. They signal competence, stability, reliability, and identity shapes behavior far more powerfully than rules. Now let's talk about the hidden success stories. People who quietly build wealth rarely talk about budgets. They talk about automatic systems, rules they rarely think about, structures that remove temptation. They don't ask themselves daily how much they can spend. They design their lives so overspending is inconvenient. Money leaves accounts before it can be touched. Savings happen before spending decisions. Bills are handled without emotional involvement. This is not discipline, it's architecture. Now let's talk about emotional neutrality. Budgets create emotional highs and lows. Pride when you stay on track. Shame when you don't. Emotional volatility weakens consistency. Systems reduce emotion entirely. When behavior becomes automatic, emotion fades, and boring neutrality is incredibly powerful, because calm behavior compounds. Now let's talk about long-term sustainability. Ask yourself this: can you imagine tracking every dollar for the next 30 years? Most people can't, and any system you can't imagine sustaining long-term is not a good system. Wealth is built over decades, not months. Systems must be boring enough to survive boredom. Now let's talk about the real role of budgeting. Budgeting works best as a diagnostic tool, a short-term awareness exercise. Track spending for a month. Identify patterns. Spot leaks. Understand behavior. Then stop. Use what you learn to design better defaults. Shift money automatically. Reduce access to impulse spending. Simplify accounts. Create buffers. Awareness without redesign just creates frustration. Awareness followed by automation creates progress. Now let's talk about relief. Most people don't want to manage money forever. They want relief. They want to stop thinking about money, stop stressing, stop negotiating, stop feeling behind. Budgets keep money at the center of attention. Good systems push money into the background. Now here's the most important reframe. The goal of personal finance is not control. It's predictability. When money is predictable, anxiety drops. When anxiety drops, behavior stabilizes. When behavior stabilizes, results improve. Predictability beats precision. Every time. Now let's talk about freedom again. Real freedom. Freedom is not being able to spend without limits. Freedom is knowing your future is secure without constant effort. Budgets ask you to be vigilant forever. Systems ask you to design once and live. And that difference changes everything. So if budgeting has failed you, it doesn't mean you're responsible. It doesn't mean you lack discipline. It doesn't mean you're doomed financially. It means you tried to solve a psychological problem with a mechanical tool. And once you switch tools, once you stop managing money and start engineering behavior, money stops feeling like a constant struggle. It becomes quieter, simpler, more forgiving, and progress stops depending on who you are on your worst days, because the best financial systems are designed for your worst days, not your best intentions.